Good evening and welcome to League of Women Voters Presents. I'm Jim Robertson and our topic tonight is an update on veterans issues in Columbia. I have an auspicious panel with me, and from my left is Maggie Siebert. She is a social worker with Welcome Home Incorporated. Stephen Gaither is Public Affairs Officer at Truman Memorial Veterans Hospital. And Richard Mendenhall is owner of Remax Boone Realty, a community leader, and is co-chair of the Welcome Home Capital Campaign Committee. Welcome and thank you for being here tonight. We're going to talk about veterans issues, which is, timing's perfect. Veterans Day was yesterday. We have, as a society, made a promise to our veterans, of which there are 22 million in the U.S. at this point in history. How are we doing on that promise? I'm going to start with you, Maggie Siebert. You work with homeless veterans.
I do.
And let's tell me about your work and what you see and the needs of the veterans you work with.
Sure. So Welcome Home is a small nonprofit homeless shelter here in Columbia, Missouri. We serve about 10 veterans at a time. Our shelter has space for 10 veterans, and we see vets from all service eras, all different ages coming in for services. And we try and help them establish income stability, residential stability, and hopefully move into permanent housing. So those are the three goals that we like to work on with them when they get to Welcome Home.
Mm-hmm. And what is your job specifically in that?
Yeah, as a social worker there, I do a lot of case management. I work one-on-one with the veterans in our shelter to help make the appropriate referrals for different resources that are available to them in the community, and also work with them on those goals to hopefully get them into permanent housing, back out into the community on their own when they're ready.
You know, I looked at the Welcome Home website, mm-hmm. and I saw a success rate of continued housing of up in the 90s, 90
mm-hmm.
percentile. How do you achieve that?
Sure. Well, luckily we've been doing this for a long time. We have a lot of experience. We were founded in 1992, and our executive director is a Navy veteran herself, so she has a lot of very good experience working peer-to-peer with a lot of our veterans, and she's been able to enlist some of that wisdom onto the staff members there, and we've been able to run a pretty successful organization. We work a lot from a peer-to-peer standpoint, so we have veterans working with veterans, veterans living in another community with veterans, so there's a lot of similar interactions going on in the house, and that seems to help a lot.
Mm-hmm, I'll bet.
Mm-hmm.
Stephen Gaither, you at the VA hospital.
Yes.
You say there are 100,000, over 100,000 veterans in
roughly 100,000 veterans
area.
Live in our catchment area.
And
we're taking care of about 37,000 veterans.
Mm-hmm.
That was the figure last year.
What are the demographics? I know. Well, 22 million veterans. You have all ages.
That's right.
Of the Gulf War, the Afghanistan and Iraq, there are what, 3 million?
I can't remember the exact breakdown, but the largest group of veteran population is the Vietnam era
mm-hmm.
group, folks my age and Richard's
age.
Mm-hmm. But of course, being in conflict for 12, 13 years, the number of veterans have increased from those conflicts in Iraq and Afghanistan. But the largest portion of veterans that we take care of are from the Vietnam era. There are still World War II veterans, Korean War veterans, the other conflicts between War on Terror and Vietnam. So,
are the things you treat, are they related at the hospital? I know you don't treat them personally, but are they related to aging? More than service-related injury, traumatic stress?
You have the whole ball of wax there. We're a full-service healthcare delivery system, so if a veteran is eligible for VA healthcare, they get the services that they need. Now, the primary group that the VA healthcare system was created for was the veteran who had a service-related injury or illness. But over time, other veterans were made eligible either by special category or because of income considerations. So 9 million veterans have enrolled in the VA healthcare system across the country. The largest group are the non-service connected veteran who fall below a means test threshold on income. But our number one priority will be those veterans who have service-related injury or illness. At Truman VA, we have medical and surgical, behavioral health, rehabilitation services, a lot of care delivered on an outpatient basis, and we are able to improve access to care with 8 community clinics throughout our catchment area, as far north as Kirksville, as far south as Marshfield. But the medical center here in Columbia is where the inpatient services and the specialty care services are delivered.
And how many beds at Truman?
We're operating 123 beds at this time. And most of those beds are acute care beds, but we do have a long-term care facility on the 3rd floor. And 35 beds are being operated there right now. That's a community living center, some traditional nursing home beds, some transitional beds, and some hospice beds. We're the only healthcare facility in mid-Missouri that has in-house hospice beds.
Richard, you're a Vietnam veteran, probably naturally interested in veterans issues. What got you involved with Welcome Home? Why are you involved with Welcome Home?
That's a good question, Jim. Primarily because friends that I know came and asked me, you know, first they told me about what was going on, and to be honest about it, I'm born and raised in Columbia, lived here all my life except for 2 years, and also when I was in the service. But I didn't realize that we had as many problems as we have, especially what Welcome Home had been doing for over 20 years. And that, as you said, sort of hit home with me. I'm one of those people who was very, very lucky and got back and was fine and never got injured or anything else. And but I also know that I had an uncle who was in the Korean War, and he had to use the VA hospital and didn't have any other choice, and that is what got him back on his feet, you know, and that kind of thing. And so, you know, how do you say it? It just is sort of personally, it's like, well, how could I turn down not trying to help on this?
Good. What, Maggie, back to you, what is the driver that makes veterans homeless? I mean, we were talking, well, 1 out of 5 homeless people is a veteran. So it's not exclusively veterans who are homeless, but how do they become, after serving their country, they have some benefit of being a veteran. How do they end up on the street?
Sure. So that can vary from case to case. So a lot of the veterans that we see come through our shelter, we may classify as a chronically homeless veteran. So they have either been homeless 1 year continuously or 4 times in the last 3 years. And when we look at especially chronically homeless veterans, we really look at the issues that keep kind of contributing to that homeless factor and putting them back in a situation that they were in previously. We see a variety of issues from lack of income to maybe veterans who don't know the types of benefits that they're eligible for, to substance abuse issues, possible physical injuries, and mental health is a big one. We see a lot of veterans who come in with some sort of mental health issue and may not even know that they had, you know, anything going on. So we can kind of explore that with them and get them the services that they need.
Are there sufficient mental health services? I know there's a deficit of mental health services for the population at large, in Missouri at least, and I think most places. Are there mental health services available to veterans?
Of all the services that we provide, that area has grown the most over the last decade. And part of it, the former Secretary of Veterans Affairs, General Shinseki, established a goal, and that was to terminate homelessness in the veteran population. He said, that's important, we're going to do it. And so a lot of resources have been put into those programs, and the programs have expanded. So we have a full array of programs here to address all of the different issues that lead to someone being homeless, and it requires this collaboration, this community involvement with all the other providers, because it takes us all to do that. Are there still shortfalls? You bet. If you look across mid-Missouri, across the state of Missouri, there are shortfalls in mental health services, inpatient beds, what have you. But we feel very comfortable that we've grown over the last decade and we're able to provide those services.
Is it having an impact on the rate of homelessness among veterans?
Nationwide, it certainly has. We've seen some up and down numbers here in central Missouri, but nationwide, the rate of homelessness in the veteran population has decreased markedly.
What about in central Missouri?
I was going to say, going back to Welcome Home as well, we work so closely with the VA with their Healthcare for Homeless Veterans contract. So once a veteran comes into shelter, they're surrounded and blanketed by services through the VA, through services in our community of Columbia. So it's a very good environment for a veteran to be in who may be struggling with homelessness or other issues. There are a lot of resources either through our local VA or just around town as well that are there to help the veteran. So it's, they get the adequate care that they need.
I know that there's an issue with capacity to serve homeless veterans, and that's an issue that Richard's working on. What can you tell us about the project?
Well, I can tell you a lot of things about the project, but I think Maggie can speak better to and tell the group how many men you turn away, and the surprise to most people, how many women you have to turn away because you don't have beds for them.
Sure. So weekly we get calls from male veterans. We talk to probably 5 or 6 a week, and I would say probably at least one female veteran, and sometimes children, sometimes not, weekly as well. So our new project, which is wonderful right now in our current shelter, we have accommodated bed space for female veterans in the past, but female veterans and veteran families are very unique populations. So some of them have very complex safety issues and aren't comfortable staying in a house with maybe 8 or 9 other male veterans. So our new community for veterans that we're working on is going to increase our bed space up to 29 beds, and also allow us to provide services to female veterans and veteran families. They'll have their own space in the shelter where they can feel safe and protected.
And along with that, there are 25 permanent apartments that will be funded through the Housing and Urban Development and VA-supported housing voucher program. We've been involved with that voucher program for quite a while, and through the Columbia Housing Authority, we've been able to place veterans into those apartments and help with their rent, and then they can progress. There are examples of veterans who've been through that program who get jobs, regular employment, and have their own homes now, their own mortgage, and join the middle class like the rest of us.
So those apartments are still transitional. The goal is to move them into private housing.
Permanent housing on their own, right.
And how does a veteran qualify for that particular program?
By being eligible for VA health care and needing that service, they qualify. So if they find themselves homeless, then there is the psychosocial rehab programs at Truman VA, and that covers all of those homeless programs, including the Veterans Justice Outreach and the Veterans Treatment Court, to give the necessary treatment that the veteran requires, and these other services, and that is where the collaboration comes with the community.
To our knowledge, and nobody's got actual facts on this, but I think this collaboration between the VA hospital, our housing authority, and also a nonprofit private organization, to my knowledge, it's the only one in Missouri that has that kind of collaboration, and it could be the only one in the nation. We don't know that. That doesn't matter. What matters, I know there's lots of other programs out there, but it's the collaboration that makes this work. I like to say to people, what's the first thing that went through our mind at 9/11? And the first thing wasn't just, probably the horror was the first thing, but the second thing was you wanted to find out where your family was. You wanted to go home. You wanted to go home. And home means a whole lot of different things to everybody. But if you've got a homeless veteran out here, how does the VA treat him if he doesn't have a place? You can't do that. And so that's the really unique thing that Welcome Home has done. And I want to tell you, I'm proud of what they've done, but if you went to see their facility today and you said, this is how we're treating our homeless veterans in Columbia, you'd be embarrassed because they're packed. They're just packed. I mean, the bathrooms it's really packed in there, and they've been doing it for 20 years. So this project is really unique. It's a collaboration of these three organizations that I'm just excited about. And so think of the person being homeless, think of that they call in, now they get some temporary housing, then they get very professional, I would call it physiological and psychological, assessments that, whatever the right terms are, I'm just giving the layman terms, to really help them and look at it and see how bad it is. And then then they need another place to go. I mean, they can't stay there forever. So they've been going to wherever the housing authority might have had space. Now we're building 25 new permanent housing, that's going to be right beside. So you got the housing authority here, you got Welcome Home here. They can come in here. It's a whole veteran community. And that's important because
So the goal is to move them through the shelter
yes,
into
it's through the shelter into this housing
Yeah.
and out of that housing into their own, so they can get a job. And this is what they've been doing. It's what's been going on. And this gives us a real opportunity to do it. Now, I will say this. In Columbia, we've had some projects that have been started, and I'm not going to name them because a lot of people worked their tails off to do it. And they raised a lot of money for these projects, but it didn't work because they didn't have the operating costs covered. They got the basics done, but they didn't have the operating costs covered. They've got the operating costs for the project that we're involved in now is just the capital campaign, and when it's done, the operating costs are there. So that makes it really uniquely different and kind of exciting and a project I do not see how this thing's going to fail.
Good. Tell us a little bit about the physical part of this project. Where is this community going to be located? How can our viewers get involved?
Sure. East of West Lakes, that's out on the corner of Old 63 and Business 70. If you go east of that, there was an old motel there. It's had numerous names. I think this last name was the Deluxe Motel or something, something like that. And it's half dilapidated, but it had two separate buildings. So the housing authority is taking over the biggest building that you see there. And then they're going to add on to that. It's completely being remodeled. It's just being rebuilt practically. But it's not being taken down because the infrastructure's been looked at and all that kind of thing. The city's looked at it. The sewers are there. The neighbors have been contacted. They, all of their concerns were addressed. So we shouldn't have a bunch of chaos with all of that. And then there's a smaller building over there. Well, the smaller building is the one that we initially see where the men would go, and then we're going to build one adjacent to it where the women would go, and then the facilities that the VA can come into and help these people. So I wish I had a diagram here for you to show it to you, but we're going to break loose with this very soon. In any capital campaign, what you really want to do is raise a lot of the money behind the scenes, and make sure it's going to happen. We are already over 55% of the money. We're going to have, in my opinion, having lived here for a long time, outside of the University of Missouri, one of the largest donations that's ever been made to a project. And there'll be an announcement on that, and I don't want to say what it is now, and those kinds
We
of...
can break news on this program.
But it's going to be exciting. It's going to be neat, and it's really going to
There's a
help.
goal to break ground in February, is that right?
Yes.
Yeah.
That's right.
Right.
So are you
Yeah.
think you're on track with that?
We do. I think we'll break ground in February.
It's been really exciting to be part of the planning, the discussions, to just see these people come together and have their act together. And it really is well done.
Good.
I haven't talked to anybody. When you mention, the great thing about this, you mention the word veteran and people are in. I think I told you earlier, that was not the case when I came back
has
from the
changed
Vietnam
over
War.
the years.
It has changed, and so people set the politics aside and they welcome the veteran. And that is a really good thing today.
Maggie, tell us what you find fulfilling about working with these men and women.
Yeah, it's one of the most resilient populations I've ever worked with. I've never really met or worked with a population who can bounce back the way the veteran population can. And There are a variety of things that can get people down, but they always seem to find the hope and the silver lining in their situations and be able to build themselves back from that. And it's an honor and a privilege to help them with that, and look forward to doing it more.
When when we increase the capacity to handle most homelessness among veterans in Columbia and Mid-Missouri, what is the greatest need after that?
It's a great question. I hope that we can take care of all of their needs. I know more will come up over time, of course, but we're working very hard to meet the needs of the homeless veterans in Mid-Missouri.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to ask you the same question, Steve. We're dealing with homelessness. So what's the next need for the veteran population?
Well, if we're talking about the homeless population, we want to make sure that we sustain those programs and those services that are available to them. And so that's going to require a commitment on the part of our nation to continue to provide those dollars to the VA healthcare system.
This week, the Secretary of the Veterans Administration announced a really historic restructuring. Mentioned that they need to hire 28,000 physicians. You mentioned that there are 60?
About 60 positions through that. The
That will be
funding
added?
from the Act, the Veterans Access, Choice, and Accountability Act that Congress passed last summer, 90 days ago. And so there are additional resources for positions that have been identified, and we identified about 60 that we need to help address the access problems that were identified.
Now, if I recall the news stories at the time, Phoenix was the hot spot.
Well, that's the situation that caught traction and got all of the publicity. There had been some other issues going on with access problems. There were some issues just with meeting performance standards, but the Phoenix situation was egregious and got the attention of the public justifiably.
And what happened? The delays in caring for veterans' needs were 120 days or longer before they could see a healthcare worker.
And there were allegations that people were never going to be seen, that they were on lists. And so all of that was part of the negative story that came out. And of course, there were other situations across the country where there had been problems in how people were handling that request. Now, we all got thrown into the same boat, and we were all scrutinized, and we had to prove that we knew what we were doing with scheduling, and we were, and if we couldn't do it within the time frame, originally the performance standard was 14 days, and then pretty soon someone realized that was just a number someone had pulled out of the air. So they started to measure it on 30 days. And that's what's being measured now. And how quickly, on average, can you get a new patient in when they come to you in primary care, in mental health, in specialty care. And we've talked about Columbia's situation. Yes, we were outside the performance standard for 14 days, but we've been under that 30-day standard for quite a while. And the last figures that we had, we were very much under that. So we are doing a very effective job in meeting the needs of the veterans. If we can't do it within a reasonable time, we've been spending a lot of dollars in providing care through non-VA providers, and that's purchasing it from private sector providers. We've spent a lot of money in the last several years to do that when we don't have the internal capacity to provide those specialty care services.
What sort of services will these 60 additional positions enable you to shore up?
Well, they're going to help with some of our specialty care services, particularly podiatry, optometry, some routine stuff, but you got to have the providers there and the space for those providers to really do those services. We've had some issues with gastroenterology at times, and so we're identifying some other specialty care areas, and if we can hire those providers, it'll improve our capacity to provide that care. Again, we're also going to have some space, and so fortunately we've got some major construction continuing We've joked over the last several years that you need a hard hat when you come to our facility because of all the construction, and it's great because it's improving the infrastructure of our facility and enhancing services. But next year, immediately after the turn of the year, there'll be enough construction going on 3 sides of the building, major construction projects, a parking garage, an additional floor to the ambulatory care addition, and a new intensive care unit on top of the new OR building back into the facility. So lots of that, and that's tied into improving our ability to take care of the needs of the veterans.
Sounds very positive.
Jim, one of the things that I think is this 29 beds for Welcome Home and the 25 for, permanent housing, that wasn't pulled out of thin air. They actually worked very closely with the VA and looked at their population and looked at what they thought was actually needed, based on their statistics and that kind of stuff. So it's not a like pie in the sky number. I think it's a number that fits for, Columbia and the mid-Missouri area and the area that they service. So I just think it was smart planning.
Well, wrapping this up, I read just the other day that I believe the projection is 300,000 additional veterans will be coming to Missouri in the next decade, over the next decade. And certainly the promise that we made to the veterans is not going to get any easier to keep. And we'll probably be producing more veterans all the time. So it's good to hear that, people are paying attention to that promise and trying to keep it.
I heard we have a new 3-star general that retired in Columbia from the Air Force, and he made a comment the other night at a meeting I was at, and I never thought about this. He said 65% of the people serving in the Air Force today have never seen peacetime. And my mouth just fell open, and that's got to be the same for the other services, and so there's going to be a lot of need when the time comes.
Yeah, you bet. Well, I appreciate the perspectives of each of you, and thank you for the work you do on behalf of veterans.
Thank you.
And it's time that we said good night, so until next time, good night.